Landlords in St. Paul, Minnesota, looking to circumvent the city's new rent control law, have started to charge tenants the cost of utilities. But is it legal? I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News. All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's going over the fact that landlords up in St. Paul, Minnesota, they're not happy with this new rent control law that was recently passed, okay? So I've made several videos about the topic. Basically, the new rent control law only allows landlords to raise rents by 3% per year. Okay, that's a very, very low rent increase. And it does not take into consideration inflation. It doesn't take into consideration rising costs that landlords are facing every single year. And you know, what it did was it just basically killed all new development within the city and put the landlords who already own properties there in a horrible situation where they probably will have to defer maintenance, not spend money on capital expenditures, and, their properties will become in worse shape because of this ridiculous law. Okay, it does not exempt new development, so even if you build a brand new apartment complex, you're still stuck under this rent control law. So of course landlords are going to do whatever they can to try to get around this law, and one of the things they're doing is they're looking at those utility bills and they're saying, hey, in the past I actually just covered this cost, right? And now we are going to make you pay for your own utility costs. And the result of that is that, hey, the costs are getting a lot higher for tenants. So the tenants aren't going to be getting away with just this minor little rent increase. They're going to have to cover the cost of their water, their trash, their sewer, their electricity, etc. So all those landlords who before weren't charging that, guess what? They have a great incentive now to say, hey, if we have the tenants pay for it, then that way we can get a little bit more return, okay? And we're not suffering as badly. So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like and subscribe button. Maybe leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think, okay? Now, I know there are other landlords on here who watch my videos who are in rent-controlled areas. So I've actually thought of this idea before, what these landlords in St. Paul are doing, and people have responded that, hey, that's actually forbidden in, the rent control ordinance. That isn't, part of it. So, it's not possible where we're from. So, if you were a landlord and you're in an area that allows you to do this, right? Would you do it? Do you think that's a good way to do it? What other ways do you think a landlord could possibly recapture some of the money if they're not able to raise rents? I would do all sorts of stuff, right? I mean, I would, we can't raise rents, right? More than 3% per year. However, I remember I had read about in the Phoenix metro area, they had this valet trash service, right? So basically, the tenants in an apartment building, they have to set their trash outside the door, and then I have my person come by and pick that trash up. Well, every single month I can charge them for that valet trash service, and they do not have the option of opting out of it. So I mean, that's another thing right there. The other thing is, obviously charging for utilities. If you want to, increasing all your other fees as well. So if you want to change the locks, or if you get locked out, your lockout fee is a lot higher. Your late fees are going to be a lot higher. Every fee is going to have to increase because you have to make up for the fact that you can't raise the rents to the level that you would have been able to do so before. And if you don't charge these extra fees, then you're going to be suffering humongously. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I imagine that now landlords are going to get a lot more strict about all these additional fees. But anyway, let's get into this article. It's coming from MinnesotaReformer.com, and it says, Tenants say landlords are skirting St. Paul rent control with new utility charges. Yeah, you can't blame them for going after that because this is their only option. If you already own property in St. Paul and you got stuck under this mess, I don't blame you for going after, the rent increases this way, okay? Now, is it legal? Well, maybe the article says more about that. Let's get into it. Some St. Paul landlords facing soaring inflation and energy costs are trying to get around the city's new rent control law by charging tenants for utilities that used to be included in the rent. It's leading to rent increases of more than 10% for some renters in a city where landlords may only increase rent 3% a year following passage of a voter-approved ordinance that went into effect May 1st. It's not a legal workaround, according to a spokeswoman for the city, but the ordinance drafted and approved by voters last fall doesn't explicitly mention utilities, setting up one of the first tests of the city's interpretation of the law and its ability to enforce it. So the city is saying right there that it is not a legal workaround. But the ordinance that was passed says nothing about utilities. Okay? So here's what my gripe is. Okay? Why is the city fighting so hard to punish landlords who are trying to charge utilities back? Okay? They already said that they don't think it's right that, hey, this isn't adjusted for inflation and that it applies to new properties as well. But then on the other hand, they're trying to say, hey, well, the things landlords are doing, that's not fair. Like, listen, choose which side you're on, okay? Are you on the side of the businesses who are trying to provide housing for the people in the city? Or are you on the side of these radical far left progressives who would, have everyone living in socialized housing? Okay, that's what these politicians need to decide. That's what the city needs to decide. If they're on the far left progressive politician side, well, then they can just let all the properties become dilapidated and then the city can buy them up and turn them all into housing projects. Okay, that's ridiculous. But if that's what they want to do, that's what they should be pushing for. Now, if they want an open market with affordable housing, then they have to let people build. They have to incentivize people to have rental properties within the city. Okay? That's what affordable housing is. Not, you doing everything you can to punish the landlords and the developers and the property owners who are trying to provide the housing. That's stupid. The fight over utilities is likely just the beginning of many more clashes in St. Paul's approximately 70,000 rental units, with landlords looking for ways to pry open the lid on the hard rent cap and tenants trying to keep the lid tightly on. Josh Muscantow and his roommate found out last month that they were going to have to start paying separately for gas, trash, and water, an additional $106 per month on average, according to the landlord's calculations. Rent was also going up 3%, their landlord, Matt Lindquist, who recently purchased the building, told them. So yeah, you're sitting here and you're telling me that, hey, guess what? There's inflation going on. So utility costs have increased. Gas, natural gas costs more. Water costs more. Everything costs more, yet you're telling me that I shouldn't charge the tenant enough rent to be able to recuperate the additional cost that I'm paying? So I have to immediately take a loss? That's dumb, okay? Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to charge the tenant for the utilities that they use. And guess what? They are going to have to pay more because of it, because now they are going to be responsible for their own utility bills. I mean, this is part of the reason why I try to get as many units as excuse me. It's part of the reason why I try to get as many of my units as possible that do not have, the joined utilities. Okay, so all of my units right now, each individual tenant pays for their own utilities, rather than me having to pay and then charging the tenant back, or making it a higher cost part of the rent. I don't like that. I've done it before in the past, but fortunately I sold my property in Phoenix where that was the case, so I don't have to deal with that anymore. Taken together, the cost of their 2-bedroom basement level unit in the St. Anthony Park neighborhood is going up 14% this year, the biggest price hike they faced in the 10 years they've lived there. It was a complete surprise, Muscantow said. No one living here thought it would be more than 3%. Well, your rent only went up 3%. The other costs have to do with the increase in utilities, okay? And that might be a workaround, but it makes perfect sense. The landlord has no incentive to pay for your utilities anymore. Zero. Okay, that is the result of the law that you guys passed. Okay, the landlord has zero incentive to, pay for other people's utilities. So, I laugh at this story because I have to question, okay, if the rent increase is so awful, if it's so bad, why are you still living there? Why don't you, like, oh, well, let me, this isn't affordable anymore. Well, go where it is affordable. Well, there's nowhere. Yeah, exactly. You're in a little island within one little city that has rent control in a large metropolitan area where there isn't rent control in the rest of the area. So if you move outside of the city of St. Paul, guess what? There's no rent control there. If you, are in St. Paul, you can have your little unit, but you got to pay for your own utilities, but you only get a 3% rent raise, So, listen, you just have to face reality. Everything is becoming more expensive, and you can't legislate your way to things being cheaper, without completely screwing up a market. So, yeah, it looks like they have a little bit more in here about, some of this tenant stuff, right? But I'm going to skip that because obviously I don't like talking too much about, the fates of tenants. Obviously, tenants are going through their own hardships. This channel is about the hardships landlords are going through, not what tenants are going through. So, landlords are allowed to increase rent more than 3% a year if they apply for an exemption from the city and are able to show the increase is justified to provide a reasonable return. For increases up to 8%, landlords' applications are automatically approved but subject to an audit, like a tax return. However, the city's rules don't allow for landlords to circumvent the 3% cap on rent by shifting responsibility for utilities onto the tenant, according to St. Paul spokeswoman Suzanne Donovan. Nor can landlords rewrite a lease when it's renewed to include these charges if they increase tenants' costs by more than 3%. So now they're saying, hey, no, we dictate how your contract is written. You cannot write in that now the tenant has to pay for utilities. Like, listen, was any of that in the law that they passed? I don't know. But if it wasn't, then it seems like the city is pulling this crap out of a hat. I gotta excuse me. I'm recovering from COVID right now, so my voice is not exactly the strongest. So, let's see here. Yeah, it looks like a lot more of this stuff is coming from tenants, rights advocates, and, I hate it when I read one of these articles and they don't actually interview the landlords, okay? And I realize a lot of landlords, they just don't want to talk to the reporters. They don't want to, be in the media with, because there's so much negativity towards being a landlord, right? But, at the same time, I want to hear both sides of the story. I do. I really do. I want to hear why the landlord came in and, decided to do this stuff, increase the rents. So, I have to make assumptions, right? And being a landlord, being a person who buys properties, I understand, the reason why when you are buying it, you have to raise the rent sometimes. So it says here that, in the story that I was going over, these guys, were talking about, they were having to pay an additional $106 per month. Well, they said their property had just been purchased, okay? So when a new person buys a property, guess what? They paid a higher amount than the previous owner did for the property, okay? I mean, 99.9% of the time they did. Okay, the person who bought it before, they bought it in the past for however much the property was valued at then. The new person bought it for the new higher amount, and so therefore they have a higher mortgage. They probably have higher insurance, higher taxes on it. They have just different costs and that means that they might have to raise the rents to cover their new higher cost basis. And that is the thing that a lot of tenants don't understand. Okay, so yeah, I hope that this is legal. I hope that these landlords who are doing this up in Minnesota, they are able to get away with it, honestly, because this isn't fair. This whole rent control thing is not fair to landlords and property owners.